so they can kind of put stuff together. My background was in terrestrial ecology, the relationships of living, non-living world. And this is one of the reasons I'm kind of interested in gardening for wildlife. And that's where I'm headed with this presentation. And hopefully people pick up a little bit and at the end have some good questions. Again, just to get started, I'm just really appreciative of everybody coming. I know this is difficult, but I think this presentation might be appropriate. A lot of us may get kind of down. We're inside all the time, not a whole lot to do. I found finding things that I've wanted to do for a long time, this is time to do it. I can work on my photography. I can do a little bit of gardening if the rain slows down a little bit, those types of things. And I enjoy just sitting out on my back porch now. And the backyard, this is not my backyard that you're seeing, but I have feeders, I have a lot of different kinds of structure in there, and the birds just come in. I enjoy listening to them, identifying them. Another thing is bird behavior. Different birds do different things. So you can actually just kind of see a background of a bird and what they're doing, and many times identify it. We'll talk about some of those things. But as we get started, let me see if I can do this. I've used a number of different books and online stuff to get this. One of them, let's see, this has got to go the opposite way. And I have references to this at the back, but Wildflowers of Tennessee, Ohio, and the Southern Appalachians has just tons of material in it. It's written by 4 different people, Horn, Cathcart, Himley, and Duell. And I find that the information in here useful for gardening as well as just going out. I have a tendency to kind of focus in on Tennessee books. This Butterflies of Tennessee, and Rita Venable is a Tennessee native, an East Tennessee native, and has done a lot of field guides and a lot of work on Tennessee butterflies. Great, great.
People can see you walking through here.
I'm sorry, what? If you're interested in just reading about why I should bring wildlife into my yard, highly recommended Bringing Nature Home. Doug Ptolemy is an excellent writer, has quite a few publications out. If you want to know best plants to put in, something like just planting an oak tree has the possibility of over 500 species of butterflies that might use that oak tree at different times of year. So those are the types of things. If you're interested in pollinators such as primarily bees, excellent pollinators on native plants, and it's Heather Holm. And I find this, I use this all the time. And the last one is a book, Native Plants of the Southeast. It's fairly large, but has a lot of good information in it. And it's Mellenchamp, I believe. Yeah, Larry Mellenchamp is the author. And again, I'll have some references at the end to this. So as we get into this, I believe the ability now to kind of take some time, find a hobby. You probably are interested in gardening, or else you wouldn't be taking this class. You may have gardens. And another aspect of just having, besides the beauty of it, is critters come and visit your garden. And being able to identify some of those things, I think helps you center into your own personal garden. I mean, it's one thing to say, here's a bird and here's a mammal, but if that bird is a cardinal and you know that, you know a little bit more about birds. If you know that it's a seed eater and it has a specialized beak, it may come to some seeds, not to others. It roosts, and I had one build a nest in climbing rose that I have. So they'll come close to you. So with that, I think I'll just go to the presentation and see if we can proceed through this. Some of the benefits of gardening for wildlife. From my perspective, providing wildlife habitat is extraordinarily important. I don't know if you've been following some of the news and the science, particularly with birds. I think in the US over the last 15 to 20 years, we have absolutely lost about 3 billion birds. They aren't coming back. This is loss of habitat, maybe striking towers, farming, taking over prairie lands. In fact, that's where most of the loss is with birds in prairies. So even on an individual basis, if you can increase habitat a little bit for birds, be it just water, or be it food, or be it cover for them, that's going to enhance their ability to survive. Enjoyable, on the other hand, for you is wildlife viewing. You'll get to know what perhaps butterflies, what the bees are doing, what the birds. Either learn to love or hate the rabbits in your garden, those types of things. Enjoying how and when they come out, behaviors. Wildlife photography is something I enjoy. The other thing is a lot of people are artists. You might have a different perspective of wildlife. I have a guy at the vet center that sits out in his backyard and draws the plants, draws the insects associated with them. I used to keep a journal. I've kind of let up on that, but I should keep it up again. So journaling, all kinds of things you can do with your garden and your time that you have now to enjoy it, take your mind off of things that are going on around us. As you can see with this diagram, can you, hopefully you can see my, well, let me see if I can do this.
Yes, you can.
If you serve, the plants will have other types of benefits to you in your house, helping to protect you from, let's say, wind in the summer, sun with trees help cooling. All of this is energy conservation, as well as helping the birds and a place for kids to play or enjoy your grandkids. Go out. It's at times could be teaching moments or just joy with your kids. At the end of the day, if it's done, probably increase the the value of your house. Yeah, this happened before. Let me see what's here. This I can feel comfortable with this. This is a picture of my son and his personal garden, taken a few years ago, and his little boy just walking around in your garden spot. Kids just soak this stuff up. Now, this isn't a wildlife garden. It's his personal, I think primarily tomatoes and maybe some peppers. But, that's going to attract certain types of wildlife. Some of it may be pests, and that's a whole different situation. But he enjoys it, I enjoy it, and little Walker enjoys it. I'm going to concentrate on native plants, and you might say why. There's thousands and thousands of non-native plants. Some of them are invasive, and I'm a proponent of getting rid of those plants. Some of them are not at all, and they're beautiful, and I have some in my garden as well. But native plants, the wildlife in Tennessee is adapted to living with the plants that are out in the woods. So that's just a natural attraction. You plant something and that particular will form habitat for the wildlife that enjoys that. They're naturally hardy. They wouldn't be in Tennessee if they froze or if it was too hot, too cold. So a native plant is going to live here. There's extraordinary diversity. If you live in East Tennessee, we go from the Cumberland Plateau over to where I am in the Ridge and Valley and up into the mountains. So there's a lot of diversity in plants and beauty and times of years associated with that. And in addition, if your yard's like mine and chert and clay, we have plants that are naturally, native plants that are naturally adapted to that. You can look and find plants that grow in shade in clay. If it's really wet and you've got drainage problems, rain gardens, there's a lot of plants that can go in there that help slow down the water. So native plants are naturally adapted to these things, and they'll grow naturally, but you can also plant them yourself. The problem with native plants is finding them. A lot of nurseries have a small selection, but a lot of this is online, and I would just say kind of read through comments and make sure that you have a good native nursery, as opposed to some that aren't as reputable. What I'm going to do is take gardening and talk about habitat for just a little bit, providing wildlife habitat. It's like if you build it, they will come. Three things associated with providing habitat for birds, bees, butterflies, mice, raccoons, whatever, deer, bunnies, is they need basically three things, just as we need three things: food, cover, and water. And we'll talk about these a little bit, but food's what you might expect, things from berries, nuts, seeds. Cover is a different topic, and we'll talk about that a little bit, but grass, shrubs, trees, snags. Water, if you have ponds, you're lucky. You might be able to build a water feature, but an easy solution is getting a bird bath, and you can actually make those pretty easily or go out and purchase one. I put mist. Just a short story is that I I enjoy hummingbirds, and I was out in my yard and I was watering and misting plants, and hummingbirds like to come to mist. They're attracted, they'll fly through it and they'll drink. So I was doing that, and a couple of hummingbirds were flying through it. At the time, I didn't realize it, but I had on a bright red t-shirt, and all of a sudden that thing came in and popped me right in the chest and was trying to get some nectar out of there, but buzzed around and left. I think I was probably the biggest flower that they had ever seen. So you can get out and interact with wildlife. Food, seeds, certainly, that you think of, from sunflower seeds, a lot of sunflowers, a lot of different types of plants like that. The acacia, purple coneflowers. Grass is a great habitat if you let it go to seed for a lot of birds, as well as other mammals and other insects. We'll talk a little bit about mast. It may be a new term, hard and soft. I'll get back to that. Vegetation, a lot of things just eat what you're growing, and a lot of times that's a bad thing. You don't want tomato hornworms on your tomatoes, but there's also natural predators that if you have a good balance in your yard, parasitic wasps will lay eggs and kill those tomato hornworms. But forage can be very good, such as some of the butterflies. The larval stage will come in and eat the vegetation. Nectar produced by plants, certainly your bees, certainly your butterflies, and in particular, your hummingbirds. Think about invertebrates, things like insects. Birds eat a lot of insects. Vertebrates, birds as well as other animals. I got a couple of hawks around, and they come in, and every once in a while I just find feathers all over the place. Well, they had a meal. Eggs, be it bird eggs or insect eggs, lizards may come in, snakes may come in. You may have other types of parasitic insects or just other insects coming in, eating eggs. With this, you're developing a circle that will sustain the wildlife in your yard, similar but not exact to a natural environment. As I said, hard mast or mast are like the nuts, your hickory nuts, beech nuts, pecans, walnuts, all of that is hard mast. A lot of animals, turkey. I had turkey in my yard today, and if there was any pecans or beech or oak acorns, they would love that. But also other animals eat that type of thing. Soft mast is what you might think: apples, plums, hawthorn, be it apples like crab apples is a native, plums, there's a native plum. We have hawthorn trees, persimmons, pawpaw, even dogwood produced a soft mast for a lot of different birds, also for some mammals. Realizing one of the things that you want to do, if you can, is make sure that you have something available all from winter, spring, summer, and fall. So that's the trick of this. If you really want them to stay, you have to have something all year long. But there's nothing wrong with putting out a bird feeder and having them eat that. That's a great way to attract, and a fairly easy way to attract birds to your yard. Most of you are familiar with dogwoods. Beautiful, beautiful tree. It's an understory tree, bright red leaves in the winter or fall, and produce a little fruit that is eaten by a lot of birds and a lot of different types of wildlife. So this is something that you would see, you might plant. One of the things I'd recommend looking at what's happening with dogwoods, there's a fungus that has been attacking them. And if you're old enough to remember, there used to be dogwoods everywhere. There's fewer and fewer, but they've developed strains or cultivars of dogwood, our native dogwood, Cornus floridana, that is resistant to that. So if you like dogwoods, go out and make sure that you buy one that is resistant. Hard mass, here's a hickory tree, great cover, good to eat for us, good to eat for a lot of different animals. The leaves are good for caterpillars and other insects to hide in. Cover, we talked about food. I think that's kind of, we all need to eat. Cover is another thing that animals have to have, particularly if you want reproduction in your yard, be it birds nesting in trees, be it bees, solitary bees nesting in the ground, butterflies pupating around your yard to produce butterflies. If you notice, the first three are plant related. Herbaceous plants, those are the types of plants that have soft tissue. A lot of your plants that you just think about, your perennials, are for the most part herbaceous and are more or less seasonal. Woody shrubs, what we're doing here is getting perhaps a little bit bigger. Woody shrubs may be evergreen, or they may be deciduous, losing their leaves in the fall and winter. But it's producing a different kind of structure or cover for different types of animals. Live trees, again, we're getting bigger. Those are your oaks, your maples, that type of thing. The last ones are not plant or living plants, but are important for us. Dead trees, what we call snags. If you look at dead trees, they often have holes in them. A lot of birds live in those holes, one of them being a bluebird. There's probably a lot of woodpecker holes from when it was living. Other types of animals utilize these types of snags for nesting or living in, for cover. Down trees, dead trees that are downed, great thing. If you can have them in your yard, obviously, if you're living in a condo, I would suggest putting out a bird feeder and some water. If you're living and have a very small yard, there's some things that you could do, and I'll show you a picture of that. Down trees may not be something you want on your porch or in your yard, but if you can, lots of insects, salamanders, all kinds of things live around down trees. A lot of invertebrates, brush piles. You'll get Carolina wrens. All types of different kinds of birds will utilize it. Rock piles the same way. Be it lizards, other birds, insects, just creating a little rock pile will bring that along. Now, what we've been talking about is creating vertical structure. That means there's plants that are ground cover. There's plants that are a little bit taller, let's say 6 inches to 3 feet, and then some that are from 3 to 15 feet, and then your overstory, which are your trees. Realizing that wildlife, there's a lot of birds that will breed and produce a nest in grass. They will not go into herbaceous cover. They will not go into a tree. That is where they live. Others are more types of understory types of birds, and that's where they eat. That's where they produce their make their nests. Others are in the tops of the forests. So all of this brings in different kinds of animals at different times of the year, providing cover and structure for wildlife. Just some examples. This is a little understory plant that you can get relatively easy called green and gold. It's evergreen all year long. It will spread at a fairly decent rate and cover the ground. Hopefully someday soon I won't have all this mulch. I'll have understory plants, and that's creating habitat. It's also an early bloomer. So those pollinators that are coming out now have something to go to get nectar, to get pollen. And it's an important thing to have early spring blooming plants. Another one that I happen to have, this is ground or yellow groundsel or ragwort. This is an evergreen plant as well, producing fairly large leaves that will cover the ground, grow fairly quickly in damp soil. If you have fairly wet soil, be it in the shade or be it in the sun, the golden ragwort will do pretty well. Early spring bloomer, this is related to things like sunflowers, but never gets over about maybe 18 inches. Dies back, and then you have this green ground cover around in your yard or your garden. Happen to have a native azalea there in the back. There's Golden Alexander, a spring and early summer bloomer. Small little flowers, but attract a lot of small insects, be they beetles, flies, bees. We have some very, very tiny bees. If you have this plant, you'll be able to see them. Grows maybe 18, maybe up to 2 feet and spreads slowly, but is a great plant, Golden Alexander. Jacob's Ladder, little pretty blue flower, early in the spring. They're in bloom now. Uh, Depending upon temperature, you'll have a cluster of leaves at the bottom, and they'll stay green throughout, typically throughout the winter. Great plant. I love native azaleas. I'm planting more and more. Some people don't like them so much, but they bloom spring to summer, different ones. They create good shrub habitat, have leaves, but unlike most azaleas, they'll lose their leaves in the late fall. Plant that a lot of people hate is our eastern red cedar. I think it's a great plant. I've planted 5 of them in my yard of different types. They, like a lot of plants, like some plants, they have male and female flowers. Only the females will have these little berries on them. Birds love these things. It's also relatively thick. I have cardinals nesting in it, some small little twitty type of birds that are about the size of your thumb. All types of things come in there, use it, but not liked by some. I love it. Here's a yard kind of without structure. They're starting, but it's not there yet. No offense to Mike, but lawns are good for robins and starlings and blackbirds. So you'll, without cover, without a good food source, what you have to do is supplement that. Here's a little hopper with a blue jay in it. Great, love little hummingbird feeders. So things are starting to come in. They've also planted around. They have plants all around. They've done a good job with evergreen plants as well as deciduous. So through the years, and that's where I am, through the years, that will grow and wildlife will come to that yard. The third requirement, we talked about seed or food, cover, and water. As you all know, as it applies to us, what we can live 2 to 4 weeks without food, water 2 or 3 days. So it's essential for wildlife as well, obviously for drinking, but also many amphibians, other types of animals live, a lot of insects reproduce and live in water. One of the things you want to be responsible about, mosquitoes will do that too. So if you don't have something eating mosquitoes, you probably need to clean some of this out. But it's also a source of food. You got larvae from dragonflies, damselflies, all kinds of aquatic insects in there, the different kinds of birds as well as fish, as well as other insects eat. And just like the terrestrial environment, we talked about food, cover, and structure, or it's best if your pond or your has some sort of substrate that can produce, let's say, larvae for certain types of fish or birds, as well as water to drink. So substrate in there is helpful. Even marbles produce something like that if you have a bird bath. My suggestion, which I have not taken yet, is keep these artificial structures like bird baths in particular, keep them close to the house. Mine is way up in the yard, therefore I got to drag the hose up there. It's harder to clean. It's out in the bright sun, so I get all kinds of algae growing in it. So if you can keep it in a cool, somewhat shady area, you're ahead of the game. And I would recommend that. Here, somebody created their own little aquatic structure, types of things coming in there. Certainly your frogs, you got a bullfrog at the bottom and a pickerel frog, and in the middle a red-eared salamander, and over here a damselfly. And all these things would be around, and it's wildlife, and it's something you can enjoy. It's something your kids or grandkids can enjoy. You can make or buy different types of bird baths. Most of the ones at the top are bought, concrete, plastic containers, all this is ceramic, all good stuff, but you can make your own. Here, somebody had a trash can, they tied a weight to it and put it on a tile pipe. Great bird bath. So you don't have to go out and spend hundreds of dollars or tens of dollars. If you have that around the house, you can do it yourself. You have an old container that had a pot in it and that pot's broken. You can put it out, put water in it. Different heights will attract different things. So it's as easy to do as you are creative, I guess. Here's a yard developed a little bit further, good structure. You got birds obviously getting insects out of the grass, but it's got a pond, a little duck here, low understory shrubs and perennials, as well as mid understory plants and some evergreens, as well as deciduous overstory. You get, this is kind of an optimal situation. You got breeding birds, all kinds of things coming in here. Little possum, depending, particularly if you're feeding animals through feeders, keep that as far away from the house as you can, as opposed to the water, because the feeders, your seeds are going to come out of there, land on the ground. Great for doves, great for starlings, but they'll attract all kinds of wildlife that you might like or you may not like. So keep it away from the house, and they'll stay away from the house as well. Here's a small yard. Look at everything that they've done in here. I think this is fantastic. A place to enjoy some grass, but a lot of different features that will attract a lot of wildlife, a place to sit and enjoy it. Here, this is a little more natural. If you got a bigger yard, place where you can walk around, see the butterflies, the bees, the birds that are around there coming to the feeders. Little nest box way back in here, probably for, well, that's a little high for wrens, but a small box. Place to sit down and enjoy, draw, write. Hummingbirds coming to the bee balm. This situation for a feeder is really good. If you got squirrels, remember, they could climb right up that pole, up to that feeder, and destroy the feeder, eat the seed. These little cylinders keep them from going, they'll go up. I have chipmunks and squirrels that go up and then come back down, go up and come back down. And then they'll finally eat seed that may have fallen out of there. You need to keep these types of feeders at least 10 feet away from anything that a squirrel might go up and jump. They can easily jump off a fence if it's less than 10 feet, a tree, and make it right to the feeder and then go around your little protective device. Here's a grandson out enjoying my backyard. It's raining at the time, but he was running around. This is late spring, early summer. I got things on my Carolina jasmine on my fence, trying to cover it up. Some Frothgilia or witch alder, I think is a common name. Some golden Alexander in the back. We go out, he enjoys looking at these things, finding different things, telling me what he's found. It's just a good place to interact with children or grandchildren. Here, we're kind of going to end up this technical presentation, but remember, if you're going to do this, you can certainly put out a feeder, you can put out water, all of that works great, and I recommend it. If you want to go the next step, realize that you put things in the ground, it's going to take a while for them to mature. It's not going to happen the first year. I'm into about the third year on mine, and I'm getting more and more birds in particular coming in that I noticed, butterflies, and certainly different kinds of bees. the first year I kept track of birds, I had 3 in my backyard. At the last count, I had 48 different species, and that's in 3 years. And I attribute that to what I've planted. You can make it so, as I said earlier, plant it and they will come. Certainly put in feeders, water, those types of things. They'll come for a while. They may leave. But if you do food, cover, and water so that it's there throughout the year, that wildlife will stay. Here, keeping a lot of plants, if you know about deadheading, plants will grow, bloom, and if you cut those blooms off, most of them will bloom again. So you can deadhead and get a second bloom, sometimes a third bloom that keeps a lot of the butterflies, and if it's a hummingbird plant, keep them around. I have a tendency to plant a lot of things in larger drifts, and I'll go in and I'll let's say, a third of it just go to seed. I'll cut another third down about midway, and then the last third I'll cut early on and keep at a relatively low level. So I have 3 different tiers of the same plant that then will come to maturity. They may not all go to seed, but at least I'll have seed for some of the birds during the fall and winter. Leaving a lot of these types of plants up that have flowered and gone to seed is an excellent idea, as long as you don't live in a community that's going to tell you to get those nasty things out of there. But keep them in your backyard, keep the seed as much as you can. Birds will come all winter long and eat that. Realize that things change over time. Some of the wildlife you may see in your backyard, I'm going to kind of concentrate on birds, but talk a little bit about butterflies and even less about insects. But some of the things I'll mention. Gardening for birds, notice I said create habitat for reproduction. Food, protection, water. What is that? Food, cover, and water. That applies to all the things we're talking about if you want to keep them year long. Here's some turkey that are in my backyard. I've let part of it go to grass. Turkey are great, just great animals. They're generalists as opposed to specific. Some animals just eat one type of plant, go to one plant for nectar. Turkeys will eat anything. Here they'll go into the grass, they'll eat seed. As that goes down, they'll eat insects. They'll eat soft and hard mast. So I have turkeys that come in my yard. I don't have big trees, but as you go this way, there's a little woodland. They'll come out of there. This wasn't this morning, but I had 10 turkey in my yard this morning. About half of them gobblers, half of them hens, and the gobblers were displaying, trying to attract the girls. So that's a bird that is relatively common around here. This isn't my photo, but it's a red-bellied woodpecker. You might think it's a red-headed woodpecker, but red-headed woodpeckers, their entire head are red. Little rarer, red-bellied woodpeckers are fairly common. Look at the little red belly. This is a boy. Males have their top of their head red all the way to the back. The female looks very similar, but the top of the head isn't red, just the back of the head. So here you're starting to learn more and more about birds. You can tell in some females from males. You can see what they eat, probably digging in, getting some insects, but they're also attracted to suet feeders, and my red bellies come to my tube feeders that I have with cracked seeds in it. Bluebirds, we talked about them earlier, going to snags, but a lot of people cut down the snags and they don't have a place to nest. So it's fairly common. If you're at all adept, you can build your own bluebird box. Tons of things on the internet about how to do that. We have classes on how to do that through Master Gardening. On the other hand, I am not that adept, so I went out and bought one. It's been up for 3 years. First year, no bluebirds. Last year, I had swallows in it. This year, I did a little bit more food. I had 15 bluebirds in the winter coming to my feeders. And this year, they started nesting, and they have a nest completely built now. And I haven't looked in recently, but they have little blue eggs. When they do, I might give it a gander. I have a clear on mine. I have a door to open, but then the backside, if I open it up, there's clear plastic, and bluebirds aren't as, you don't want to do this all the time, but you can get in there, take pictures, look at them, see how they're doing, close it up, and they'll be just fine. You may get 3, even 4 clutches during the year. Things about feeders. Feeders get very dirty. Bird boxes, often bird mites, that type of thing. Nests need to be cleared out occasionally, if you can, after the season is over, and clean them up. We talked about cardinals. This is a bird that most of us know. They can stay year round. They have a beautiful call that you can learn to identify. You don't have to see them. You can hear them, and you know you got a cardinal over there. That beak tells you that they're probably eating seeds, so they'll come to your feeder as well as other types of plants that you put in your garden. Bird that I got a love-hate relationship with. Mockingbirds are got a wonderful call. They usually will call in series of 3. So they may go deal, 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 and they'll make 3 different calls, and then 3 more and 3 more that are very melodic, and you'll learn to identify them. One of the things, if you have them nesting around or they set up a territory, they do become very territorial. And I have them chase birds off of my feeders. They'll take it as their own. So that's something to be a little concerned about. But if you have a lot of native plants around, they don't need the feeder. The birds don't need the feeders. This is a bird, to me, easy to identify, but changes with, be it morning, noon, night, shade. This color looks different, and I've probably misidentified mockingbirds more than any other bird. You want to see something and you make it. But mockingbirds are great to have around, great to listen to. We have white-breasted nuthatch. I had them coming in this year to my tube feeder. I've included them because they're cool. If you see a nuthatch and you see a bird walking down a limb, it's probably a nuthatch. Then they'll fly back up and they'll walk down. Insect eaters, but they'll take some seeds. They're around here, relatively common, small bird. The brown-headed nuthatch I saw for the first time this year. I didn't think they were up in Tennessee. I thought they were native of the southern piney woods, but I do have some pine around, and they visited my feeder a couple of times. You know, one of the things, if you're keeping a journal, a lot of plant folks do, and they'll say, well, geez, I haven't seen this bird. It was a southern bird. Or I've never seen a plant bloom this early. Well, you may have had a warm winter like we did this year, or you, over a long term, you keep that up for 10, 20 years, you may be able to document if it's the global change in weather patterns. People are, particularly some of the native nurseries, are seeing things they haven't seen before. Hummingbirds, I'm going to spend just a little bit about. Ruby-throated is what you're going to see around here. During the winter, you'll have hummingbirds coming to your feeders until October or so. They'll migrate through. Look at when they come this year, April. It's time to put out your hummingbird feeders now. With the warmer winter, they may already be here. I have some plants, I haven't seen them, but they could be. Put out your hummingbird feeders and watch the hummingbirds. Great behaviors to watch, interesting, all kinds of things going on with them. Realizing that if the first ones you see are probably the males, females usually follow a little bit later. They migrate primarily from Mexico and Central America. Most of them fly over the Gulf of Mexico, land on the beaches of Alabama, Georgia, Florida, and those people see tremendous amounts of birds coming in just to their feeders. Here, they'll follow a little bit later. Great, this isn't a very good picture, but the bee balm, particularly the red bee balm, great hummingbird plant. They'll come in and they'll put their bill down that little tube and work that thing and come around. I have quite a bit of the red bee balm around. Hummingbirds love it. Right now, columbine is coming up, early spring bloomer. The bee balm's more summertime. The hummingbirds will come and use your columbine. Just be careful if you have columbine. I do, I love it. But these seeds, it produces a lot of seed and it spews that around maybe 10, 15 feet around. Next year, you'll have a lot more columbine. Year after that, more. And that could be a good thing, or it may be something that you have to go out and pull. So just be aware of that. I have been trying, my yard isn't, for whatever reason, pineapple sage is not a native plant, but it's a great hummingbird plant. I have a hard time getting it to grow. I'm going to try again, but your yard might be great for pineapple sage, great for hummingbirds. A native plant around here is your red buckeye. Look over here, it produces what? A hard mast. A lot of mammals, birds, larger birds will eat that. Just be aware, I got to caution, supposedly the red bud or the red buckeye nut is poisonous. How poisonous it is, different things, the journals and so forth say different things. But if you got dogs around or little kids that like to eat anything that's in sight, I'd put this outside your fence or in the backyard. The red buckeye can be trimmed back and kept as a shrub or grow up to 30, 40 feet. Notice red and tubed flowers seem to attract hummingbirds. That's kind of the key to all of this. Cardinal flowers, I love them. A summer plant, very unique. If you can see this hummingbird, and do you see this little thing right on top of his head? That's where the stamen pistil is, and they're pollinators. They'll go up and they'll get the nectar out of that tube, and their head will go right into where the pollen is located. They'll go to another flower, transfer that pollen to another. Really fun to watch when they do that. Hits them right on top of the head. Great adaptation on both parts, animal as well as plant. Hummingbirds, I've only seen 2 hummingbird nests. They're small. They say around the size of an English walnut. Up to 10 to 12 feet, but they'll certainly nest lower than that, produce 2 white eggs about the size of a little pea. And during this time, the hummingbird is actually out gathering small insects for the most part, and they may not come to your feeders, and you might think that they've left, but they're out getting high protein types of insects for their young so that they'll grow fast. And eggs, let's say a couple of weeks, another 20 days, so a month, month and a half, they'll be back out and flying around, and they'll be at your feeders, your bee balm, whatever you might have. Feeders, this particular one, there's as many different kinds of feeders as you can imagine. This doesn't hold so much, so if you only have a few birds around, you don't want something a quart size, because it's just going to sit there. Little insects, particularly little sweat bees, will climb down this and they'll just fill this up. A little bit later, it will get associated with fungus. You got to clean these things out, even the small ones. The big ones, if you think, oh, I can leave this up all summer long, it will be a mess. So don't do that. Unless you got tons and tons of hummingbirds, of which some people do. Easy to make this sugar water. Put 4 parts of water and 1 part of granulated sugar. I have a pitcher that I have that I'll put 16 cups of water in and 4 cups of sugar, and I'll just stir it up. You don't have to boil it. You don't have to do anything. Since your feeder probably has red on it to attract the bird, there's really no need to put dye in there. There's different studies. Some say it doesn't bother. Some others say it does. Why take a chance? Different kinds of feeders, just real quick. Cardinals, hopper feeders. These are kind of hopper feeders. They can just fly in and get food. Tube feeders, I'll show you a picture of. Niger seed, if you got goldfinches, and you probably do, they'll be eating a lot of seed, but they like this little Niger seed, and there's feeders for that. Sparrows, it says hoppers and platform. I have them on the ground. I've never seen one in a feeder. I'm sure people have, but they're on the ground eating seed for the most part. I have a little chickadee that comes to a hopper feeder I have. I have safflower in it. I was watching it. It would fly over. It'd pick up 1 seed, fly away, go to the woods, come back about a minute or 2 later, pick up 1 seed, go back, pick up a seed, go back, pick up a seed, go back. So I did some reading, and it says it's not unusual for chickadees to collect seeds and put them in the bark of the tree they're in, and have something to eat anytime they want it, or feed their young, and they don't have to go out. Mourning doves, if you have a tray feeder, great. Mine, I just got food all over the ground where the starlings come in and throw it all over the place, and they're always on the ground cleaning up after the starlings. Bluebirds, the next picture that I inadvertently went to, I worked for bluebirds, getting them to them, and mealworms will attract them. I've had road-breasted grosbeak last year, but not this year. Nuthatches, winter wrens. Hoppers, tube feeders, suet feeders, Niger feeders, cup feeders, tube feeders, types of different things. I'd recommend going to a bird seed place that specializes in this, and at least talk to them, see the different kinds of feeders. They're knowledgeable. They'll tell you what kind of seed to get. They'll tell you where to put them, how to put them up, give you all kinds of information. Then it's up to you if you want to buy there. It may be a little more expensive. It may not. They often have discounts that make it easy to go to. But seed and feed places have a lot of seed. Walmart that has a lot of useless seed for particularly birds, and it just, half of it goes to waste. But let somebody educate you about it, and then make your decision of where you can buy food and feeders wherever you want. Here's one for mealworms for bluebirds. I have more of a feeder like this. The problem is every other bird gets in there. If you have something smaller, the mealworms, you can buy them live, or you can buy them preserved, and they love either one. But I had bluebirds coming into those things. They loved it, and I had a pair set up in my box. Realize that you got suet feeder. Here's a tube feeder, little holes and perches on it. I got 2 or 3 of these. I got 3 of these. This would be another tube feeder. This probably, if you have squirrels, you need to put a cylinder on here. Here's a hopper. Unless you just want to feed squirrels, don't put corn out, because they'll find a way to get to it. Here you can find another cylinder, a little suet feeder, a little hopper, something to keep the squirrels and ground chipmunks out of there, and it's over 10 feet away from anything that a squirrel can jump from. Quickly on butterflies, butterflies are in an order called Lepidoptera, as well as the moths. Interdependent relationships that's an ecology word. Interdependence, things that rely on each other or different things or different types of organic situations and non-organic. Realize that the adult butterfly is a nectar gatherer, so they're going to be to your flowers eating nectar. They are a pollinator, but not one that is highly recognized, but they do pollinate. Realize that there may be a completely different plant, an independent plant that the larvae eat. So in this case is the monarch, and we'll talk about that in particular. As you probably know, they have 4 distinct stages: butterflies, eggs, larvae, pupa, and adults. These guys are eating foliage. These guys are eating nectar. Some that you might see around your yard: your swallowtails, your monarchs, your fritillaries or fritillaries, however you pronounce it. Here's a non-native plant, and that's a zinnia. If you want butterflies, it's a non-native plant. It's an annual. It grows easily. Zinnias are pretty, I think. Others may not. I think they're great. They attract bees, butterflies, other types of insects. A great plant to have around. They'll reseed if you don't, and produce more zinnias the next year. Here, a thing to remember is your larval host plant. If you want them year around, you're going to have a host plant. Something the larva eats is a host plant. Here, this is a monarch in my backyard. It's on a swamp azalea. You can see a couple of them, a big one, a small one. They come in 5 different sizes. The more they eat, the bigger they get. They shed their skin and they're bigger. They shed their skin and they're bigger. They'll typically be on leaves. These 2 guys are up in the flowers for some reason. Again, different types of situations as far as structure help create a good habitat for butterflies. One of the things people don't think about: butterflies will bask. They'll be out in sunny places, come around, and they'll also puddle, go to shallow water. Both of these things are things you can do for your yard. They'll puddle and bask, picking up minerals that they need, as well as drinking water. These things are necessary to keep these butterflies around and in your yard. As you can, none of us, I shouldn't say that, most of us don't have, 1,000 acres of corn or wheat or something where pesticide use may be really needed. A lot of things we can do just by hand, mechanically. A lot of them, those organic treatments such as soap and neem oil, that can do that. If you have to spray, keep it local in small areas, and stay away from your systemic pesticides if you can. They call it, you may have heard the word nicotinoid. These are systemic that get into the plant, last a long time, and used to be used tremendously back in the 70s, reduced use now. Some of the plants you might attract butterflies. In the foreground, that orange plant is butterfly weed. The yellow plant is a coreopsis, a type in the sunflower or aster family. Here's some swamp milkweed is one of the best. There's all different kinds of milkweed plants. Swamp milkweed, it grows, you plant 1, next year you'll have 10. The roots spread and more plants will grow. Tolerate sunny, wet areas very well. Drier, real gravelly areas, not so much. There you may want to, here they're side by side, but if you got an area like that, put in your butterfly plant. It has a taproot instead of rhizomatous roots, goes way down. does well in dry areas. Joe Pye weed, great for bees, great for butterflies, beautiful plant, I think. Used to be a wild, still is a wild plant you'll just see out growing around, but there's cultivars that won't get over a couple feet tall. The native plant gets up to, 8 to 10 feet. So think about your yard and where you can use them, or if you can use them. Look at cultivars. The native many of the cultivars are equal for producing pollen and nectar, and it may fit better in your yard if it's a smaller plant, smaller cultivar. This is a non-native, a terrible picture, but it's a lantana. These things are great butterfly plants. I would just caution, get one that is South American or North American and not Eurasian. Those are somewhat invasive, and I'd stay away from those lantana. So try to find South America, Central America, Mexico, US lantana. Bees, just quickly, require the same thing as butterflies for the most part. Realize that the honeybee that you see here and here is a non-native. It's a European honeybee. This is what you usually see in apiaries or folks that raise bees, have the beehive that they keep. Great pollinators. They're used in orchards. They're often moved from the West Coast in trucks through the West and come all the way to Tennessee and used at different times of year. Bumblebees, we have great variety of bumblebees, colonial like this, but they nest in the ground. Fun to watch. Typically, I mean, they can sting, but I've never been bothered by them. Smaller hole nesting or butterfly bees here coming to a golden Alexander, here to a non-native, looks like lavender. These are some of the hole nesting bees, solitary bees for the most part, that we have hundreds and hundreds of different species around. Important pollinators for all kinds of plants, realizing that probably a third or so of our food that we eat are pollinated by bees, honeybees, as well as native bees. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 75% of our flowering plants are pollinated by bees. A lot of them, others are wind pollinated, or other things like beetles, hummingbirds, different kinds of butterflies, bats will get in and pollinate plants. But here, we talked about water. You can create little bee water things, little jars with here marbles in it so they can walk around. Here somebody's using a drain pipe with some rocks in it. Bees, other things will come to that, and it's kind of a fun thing to do. Other things I didn't talk about are, here's a rabbit. I say that not kindly, I guess, but rabbits are fun, but they get into some of my plants. They wait till they're fully bloomed and then they just eat them. I can tolerate a few, but I'm getting more and more, so I'm looking at ways to have rabbit stew, I guess, facetiously. But other things that may or may not be pests, deer, possum, raccoon, mice, rats, voles, all of these things could come to your yard, but if you keep a lot of the things they enjoy, particularly food, away from the house, they aren't going to bother you. Some of the other types of bee and plants that you might see, butterfly plants, asters. Asters are great fall plants. So you have a lot of green in the spring and in the fall, summer, and then fall, late summer, they'll start blooming and you'll have this all over your yard, different kinds of asters. Bees and butterflies love this. I have a climbing aster that this year bloomed into January. So I had honeybees until January on that. Yarrow, a lot of you are familiar with that. great little plant, spreads. These two spread fairly slow. The wild one, which is white that I have, it's growing at a rate of about 6 to 8 inches every year as far as spreading out. So I'm going to have to watch it. I love goldenrod. Everybody thinks this is what makes you sneeze. Different species of goldenrod, they do not. The pollen's too big. It's other plants that do that, like ragweed. Goldenrod are wonderful. Here's a good hummingbird plant, coral honeysuckle. If you have Japanese honeysuckle in your yard, I grew up with it as a kid. I remember the smell. I loved it. I'd suck on it. It's an invasive plant. It's covering all kinds of things. If you can get rid of it, great. Plant your native honeysuckles. There's 3 or 4 different kinds. Echinacea or your purple coneflowers, good for butterflies, good for bees, beautiful plant. Here's a large area full of them, nice color, summer, early fall. Here's a non-native plant. This happens to be dill, but things like fennel, actually parsley, attract a specific butterfly, and actually this is a zebra butterfly, and it's only found on dillweed. So if you don't have dill, you're not going to have zebra butterflies. Coreopsis, we had mentioned earlier, different kinds of sunflowers, tons of these that will bloom from early spring into late fall or early winter. Great for pollen, good seed production for birds if you can leave that all during the late fall and winter. Black-eyed Susan, same thing, different kind of plant. Great, I have birds come to this all fall long eating the seeds. We talked a little bit about butterfly weed. Here at the bottom, you can see a monarch in it. At the top, getting the nectar. Towards the end of all this, the violet, people see it as a yard pest, and it probably is to a lot of folks. On the other hand, it's a host plant for skippers. It's a type of butterfly, and they only go to violets. Skippers, there's 15, 20 or more species around here. If you ever heard of fall warblers, identifying them is difficult. I am not there yet. I can identify a skipper, but I can't tell a dusky from a Maryland skipper. So it's something I'm working on. Another great understory plant is serviceberry. I've got a couple of these. The thing that I did wrong is it's in the rose family, and I also have cedar trees. You may have heard of cedar apple blight. Well, I got it because I have both. I also have hawthorn that does the same thing. So I'm vigorously cutting it out as I see it and spraying with a fungicide. Hopefully I can get rid of it, not have to either take the rose type of trees out or the cedars. Here's at the end some of the books I mentioned. Doug Ptolemy book, great read, good information. Native plants with in the southeast, Mellenchamp, wildflowers of Tennessee, birds of Tennessee, butterflies of Tennessee, pollinator and native plants. If you're interested in pollinator, look up Heather Holm. Google, look for these. If you're interested in native plants and actually doing this, Tennessee Native Plant Alternatives to Exotic Invasives lists invasive plants in this area and plants that you can put in instead. So it may say take out something, but here's some alternatives, 2 or 3 of them, produced by the Tennessee Exotic Pest Plant Control. You just Google this, you'll get it. When it comes up, be a long list of different kinds of trees, shrubs, herbaceous, and grasses that you can use. The bottom one, great if you're just kind of finding what might be available in your area to use, if you Google landscaping with native plants produced by the Southeastern Exotic Pest Control Council, you'll get West, Middle, and East Tennessee. We're in East Tennessee. Click on that and it'll give you all kinds of examples, tell you the pH of soil, tell you if they're shade or sun tolerant, see if they're require lots of water, some water, or can live in a pretty dry environment. So there's two things you can find pretty easily, just to give you an idea of what may be growing around here. Here's some bird apps. I like the Audubon Bird Guide app. I use that, help me identify plants. I like the Cornell Merlin bird and the Cornell eBird. eBird creates a checklist for you, keeps track of the birds you've seen. Merlin is another help guide to identify. And I know Merlin does, I'm not sure about the Audubon, but it also has bird calls on it. So if you click on that, in your backyard, start playing it. Some of the small birds, like if you have a chickadee, you have put on the chickadee bird call, and you'll have chickadees coming almost up to you and calling. Carolina wrens do the same thing. You might get towhees or cardinals calling out on back to you. So it's just a fun thing to do, sit in the backyard, see if you can get all the birds chirping. If there's any questions, that's my presentation. I'm not sure if Liam or Tom have anything.
We might have to move. We had a couple questions, but I think we have to move along here a little bit.
Okay, good.
That's right. That was very good. I want to have everybody thank. Yeah, clap, clap, clap.
Okay.